The tire gave out with a loud pop, just as Rachel steered her car onto the shoulder, a mile from the preschool, and already 15 minutes late. She exhaled slowly, gripping the wheel, her son's juice box leaking on the backseat floor. When she finally stepped out and knelt beside the deflated tire, she didn't expect her old college crush, the boy she used to sit behind in Intro to Lit, now covered in grease with the same crooked smile, to crouch beside her and say, "Need a hand, Rach?" Rachel blinked. For a second the world around her froze. Cars still whooshed by, the sun still beat down, warming her already flushed skin. But time, the kind that lived in her chest, stilled. "Ben," she said slowly, standing upright. Ben smiled, eyes squinting in the sunlight. "Didn't think you'd remember me that fast." Rachel felt her throat tighten. "I used to copy your poetry analysis essays. Of course I remember you." Ben chuckled, running a gloved hand through his hair, leaving a streak of black smudge across his temple. "And I let you copy them. Felt like a worthy cause." She opened her mouth to say something witty, something casual, but nothing came out. Her thoughts were still trying to piece together the fact that her college crush, the guy who once quoted Rilke and wore threadbare hoodies that smelled faintly of lavender, was now crouched by her car in a mechanic's uniform with her son's toy dinosaur under his boot. Ben noticed the silence and stood. "Let me take a look at that tire. Mind if I?" "No, yes, please." Rachel stepped back, almost stumbling into the roadside ditch. "Sorry. I didn't expect to see anyone I knew today, especially not here." "Flat tire's a great equalizer," Ben said as he crouched again, inspecting the damage. "This one's done for. You got a spare?" Rachel looked down at him, still processing. "Yeah, I think so, somewhere under the trunk mess." He glanced up at her. "Kid mess or adult mess?" Rachel smiled faintly. "Both." Ben walked to the trunk as she opened it. A landslide of plastic toys, old receipts, and a crumpled tote bag spilled out. He grinned. "Ah, the classic mom trunk." Rachel gave him a sheepish look. "Guilty." Ben began moving things around. "How old's the kid?" "5, she said, glancing back toward the car. "His name's Eli. He's obsessed with space, hates broccoli, and believes raccoons are spies." Ben laughed. "Sounds like a solid worldview." Rachel watched him work, efficiently, confidently, like someone who had done this 1,000 times, but still with care. There was no condescension, no showmanship. Just Ben. Grown up. Grounded. And somehow, still warm in a way most people forgot how to be. "I work down the road," Ben said as he rolled the spare out. "Saw you pull over, figured I'd check in." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You work at Donnie's Auto?" Ben nodded. "Since about 5 years ago. Took over when Donnie retired." "But you were going to be a writer," she said softly, not meaning to sound disappointed, just surprised. Ben didn't flinch. "Life wrote a different draft. I ended up liking the edit." Rachel smiled at that. "Still poetic." Ben shrugged. "It sneaks out sometimes." He lowered the spare and began working the jack under the car. Rachel stood beside him, not sure where to look. At the road, the fields, her feet. Everything felt strangely intimate and wildly out of place. "I remember you used to draw during class," Ben said without looking up. "Sketching on your notepad instead of taking notes." Rachel laughed. "I still do, well, when I'm not folding laundry or packing lunches." "You still paint?" he asked. "A little. Not like I used to. I mostly teach art now. After-school programs, private lessons when I can." Ben paused, then said, "So we both took side roads." Rachel looked at him and smiled, more genuinely this time. "Yeah, but maybe the side roads are the real ones." Ben nodded, tightening the last lug nut. "All done." She looked at the tire, now whole again, and felt oddly emotional. Not because of the tire itself, but because of what it interrupted. The blur of routine, the endless race of doing everything alone. And here was Ben, stepping in quietly, just like that. "Thank you," Rachel said. "Really. I didn't expect help today." Ben dusted off his hands. "Well, today had other plans." She hesitated. "Would you Want a coffee? As a thank you? Ben smiled, slow, deliberate, and a little curious. Rain check? I've got a car waiting in the bay. But maybe tomorrow? Rachel felt her cheeks warm. Sure, tomorrow. Ben took a step back, offering a gentle wave as he walked toward his shop truck. Good seeing you again, Rach. You too, Ben. She stood by the car long after he left, her heart beating with something that felt like nostalgia, but also maybe like a beginning. The drive to Eli's preschool was quiet, aside from the gentle squeak of the spare tire and the occasional rustle of snack wrappers from the back seat. Eli had fallen asleep, juice-stained and shoeless, clutching a plush rocket ship. Rachel glanced at him through the rearview mirror and sighed. They were so late she didn't even bother trying to explain. Instead, she walked him inside, exchanged tired smiles with the teacher, and muttered something about traffic and bad luck. When she returned to the car, her thoughts immediately circled back to Ben. Ben Dawson. He hadn't crossed her mind in years, not consciously anyway. But now that his name was back in her life, it felt like a bell she'd forgotten how to unring. She remembered the way he used to speak in class, slow, thoughtful, like every word was a brick in a castle he was building. And the way he used to glance at her sketches, never saying much, but somehow seeing all of it. She drove home on autopilot, her fingers tapping the steering wheel, replaying every word they'd exchanged. There had been a warmth in his voice, but also a quiet distance, like time had changed him, but maybe not completely. Once home, she opened the door to the usual chaos. Shoes by the stairs, mail on the floor, dishes still in the sink from the rushed breakfast. She kicked off her flats and moved through the house, her fingers trailing the back of the couch, eyes unfocused. On the kitchen counter sat a painting she'd been working on in fragments, a soft watercolor of a child reaching for stars. It was unfinished, like most things lately. She sat down and stared at it, but instead of reaching for the brush, she found herself pulling out her phone. She typed Donnie's Auto into the map app and located it. Just a 15-minute drive. Close. Too close, maybe. She hovered for a moment, then set the phone down and stood again, unsure what she was doing or what she wanted from this. The next morning, after dropping off Eli, on time this time, she debated going straight to her afternoon class or stopping for a coffee. Her body ached from the lack of sleep. Eli had been up at 3 a.m. convinced the moon was knocking on his window, and her nerves still buzzed from yesterday. She chose coffee. The bell above the door rang as she stepped into the Mug and Spoon, the neighborhood cafe that still played old Norah Jones tracks and served coffee strong enough to slap you awake. Rachel ordered her usual and sat by the window. She wasn't expecting Ben to walk in, but he did. Grease on his jeans, his dark hair pushed back messily, holding a takeout cup and scanning the place as if he had been hoping for something. When his eyes landed on her, they both froze. Rachel raised her eyebrows, smiling awkwardly. "Hey," Ben approached, half laughing. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same." He gestured to the chair across from her. "Mind if I—" "Please," Rachel said, nudging it with her foot. He sat, settling the cup on the table. For a moment they just sipped in silence, letting the strangeness settle. "Thanks again, by the way," Rachel said. Ben waved it off. "You've thanked me twice already. I think I'm good for a year." "Well," she said, "I meant it. He leaned back, eyes scanning the window. "You always this grateful to random guys from lit class who change your tire?" Rachel laughed. "Only the poetic ones." They both smiled, and the silence between them grew easier. Ben finally said, "You looked surprised yesterday, like seeing me was the last thing you expected." "It was," Rachel admitted. "You were always this, I don't know, dreamy book guy. I never imagined you'd be—" "A mechanic?" Ben said, finishing for her. She paused. "No, I mean yeah, but not in a bad way." Ben nodded slowly. "It's okay. I didn't imagine it either." Rachel looked at him carefully. "Do you like it?" Ben turned his cup in his hands. "Most days, I like fixing things, making something run again. It's not poetry, but it's got rhythm." She watched him for a moment longer. He was still him, still thoughtful, still able to say things that felt deeper than they should. But something had settled over him too, something quieter, maybe heavier. Ben looked up at her. "What about you? Art teacher, right?" Rachel nodded. "Yeah, it's messy, low-paying, sometimes frustrating. But when a kid paints something wild and beautiful and believes in it, that part's magic." Ben smiled. "So we both do something messy with our hands." Rachel chuckled. "And probably both underpaid." They shared a look that felt like an old inside joke, one they never had the time to write. Ben set down his empty cup. "I should get back. Got a carburetor yelling my name." Rachel hesitated. "Hey, if you're not busy later this week, maybe we could catch up properly." Ben tilted his head. "Like, intentionally?" Rachel nodded. "I owe you more than coffee, and I'd like to know what else you've been up to all these years." He studied her for a beat longer. "Okay. Friday night? I'm usually off by 6. "Sounds perfect," Rachel said. Ben stood and gave her a look she couldn't quite read, part warmth, part caution. "See you Friday, Rach." As he left, Rachel sat back in her chair, pulse fluttering just beneath her skin. She wasn't sure what this was, or where it would go, but for the first time in a long while she wasn't afraid to find out. By the time Friday arrived, Rachel had gone through 3 wardrobe changes, 2 moments of panicked second-guessing, and 1 full conversation with her bathroom mirror that ended with her saying, "It's just coffee, not a date." But even as the words left her mouth, she knew she didn't believe them. Eli was with her mom for the night, and Rachel had the house to herself for once. She wasn't sure what to do with the quiet. It felt suspicious, like the universe was planning something and hadn't let her in on it. She arrived at the Mug and Spoon a few minutes early and picked the same table by the window. She liked the way the golden light filtered through the leaves outside, casting gentle shadows on the table. It made everything feel softer. Ben arrived exactly at 6, wiping his hands with a rag as he walked in. He looked freshly showered, but the faint scent of motor oil still clung to him. Not unpleasant, just honest. "Hey," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "You look tired?" Rachel interrupted, grinning. Ben laughed. "I was going to say nice, but sure, tired too." "Accurate," she said. "Single mom life." They ordered, then fell into an easy rhythm, talking about small things first. The local hardware store that just closed, a new mural painted by one of her students, a neighbor's dog that had somehow become a community mascot. Nothing urgent, but not empty either. After a while, Ben leaned back and said, "You know, I used to wonder what happened to you." Rachel looked up. "You did?" "Yeah," Ben replied. "You disappeared right after graduation. One day you were there, the next, gone. I always meant to ask someone." Rachel hesitated. "My dad got sick. I had to move back home fast. Things got complicated after that." Ben's expression softened. "I'm sorry." She shrugged, her eyes drifting to the window. "Life happened. You blink and it's 5 years later, and you're bribing a 5-year-old with gummy bears to put on socks." He smiled. "And you're still sketching stars on napkins." Rachel glanced down and realized she had been doodling absent-mindedly on her paper napkin, a pair of hands holding a tiny planet. "I guess some things stick," she said. Ben nodded, thoughtful. "I always thought you were the bravest person in that class." She blinked. "Me?" "You sat alone. You drew when no one else did. You spoke up even when people rolled their eyes. That takes guts." Rachel felt something tighten in her chest. Not pain exactly, more like recognition. "I didn't feel brave. I just didn't know how else to be." Ben met her gaze. "Exactly." The moment hung between them, gentle and unforced. There was something about being seen, not in the dramatic movie kind of way, but the quiet kind, the kind that reaches down and holds the parts you thought no one remembered. "Can I ask you something?" Rachel said. "Of course." "Did you really never know that I had the biggest crush on you back then?" Ben paused mid-sip. "Wait, what?" Rachel laughed. "Oh, come on. I used to stare at you and lit like you were a character from a novel. I thought you were brilliant." Ben's ears turned slightly red. "Well, that would have been good to know. Would it have changed anything? He smiled. Maybe. I had a thing for you too, but you always seemed unreachable. Rachel raised an eyebrow. I was drawing on napkins and eating cereal for dinner. How unreachable is that? Ben chuckled. You had this energy, like you were going somewhere bigger. Rachel's expression softened. And then I didn't. He shook his head. No. You just took a different road. Still big, still beautiful. The waitress came by to ask if they wanted dessert, but neither of them noticed right away. They were too lost in the moment, not dramatic, not cinematic, just two people catching up on the version of life they didn't get to live. They ordered pie, shared it, laughed about a group project where someone fell asleep mid-presentation, talked about their favorite books, their worst roommates, their broken hearts. As the cafe began dimming its lights, Rachel glanced at the clock. Wow, we've been here 3 hours. Ben looked surprised. Feels like 20 minutes. Rachel reached for her bag. I should probably head out. Early morning tomorrow. Ben nodded, standing as she did. Want me to walk you to your car? She smiled. I'd like that. Outside, the night air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. They walked slowly, not saying much now, just letting the silence speak for them. When they reached her car, Rachel turned. Thanks for tonight. I didn't realize how much I needed this. Me either, Ben said. For a second, they just stood there. Rachel didn't lean in, neither did Ben. But something passed between them anyway, like a promise not made, but maybe waiting. Good night, Ben. Good night, Rach. She got in the car and drove home, her chest light and full all at once. And as she pulled into her driveway, she whispered to herself, smiling, it's just coffee, not a date. But deep down, she knew better. Rachel stepped over a pile of Legos on the living room rug, clutching a laundry basket against her hip and muttering a soft ow as she caught the edge of one sharp brick. The house was quiet, Eli already asleep upstairs, and the clock on the microwave read 9:17 p.m., Friday night. She dropped the basket on the couch and stood there for a moment, staring at the small watercolor painting that leaned against the bookshelf. She hadn't had time to hang it yet. A field of flowers Eli had painted with his fingers, bold and messy, and a little too pink. It made her smile every time. There was something different about tonight, a slowness in the air, the kind of peace she usually didn't allow herself to feel because she was always in motion, always chasing the next meal, the next school form, the next overdue bill. But tonight, after that long conversation with Ben, she felt still. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. Her eyes drifted to her phone, and before she could talk herself out of it, she opened the gallery and pulled up a photo she had quietly taken of Ben when he wasn't looking. Laughing, a fork full of pie halfway to his mouth. It wasn't about the photo, it was about the feeling it gave her, that maybe not everything good had to be behind her. Upstairs, she checked in on Eli one more time. He was curled up with his rocket ship under one arm and a book half open on his chest. She tucked the blanket around him gently and kissed his forehead, whispering, "You're my whole world." When she finally lay in bed, her thoughts drifted backward, to college, to half-finished dreams, to the boy in the back row who once quoted Emily Dickinson and now smelled faintly of engine grease and pine soap. She wondered what his life was like when he went home. Ben's apartment was quiet, except for the distant hum of the fridge. He'd thrown his jacket on the kitchen stool, still had his boots on, and was nursing a cold beer he didn't really want. The room was small but clean, organized the way a man keeps things when he doesn't expect company. The walls were mostly bare, except for a corkboard covered in old photos. One of his dad holding up a fish, one of a younger Ben with greasy fingers and an engine in pieces, and one torn photo of him and someone else, the corner burnt but the memory intact. He stared at that one the longest. Rachel. He hadn't said her name out loud yet, not since they reconnected. But it echoed in his mind now, soft and steady, like a song he hadn't realized he still remembered. The way she looked at him, it was like no time had passed and yet a lifetime had. She still tilted her head when she was curious. still chewed the inside of her cheek when thinking, but she had a tiredness in her eyes now, the kind you only got from carrying too much alone. He liked the way she talked about her kid, with pride, with weight. Like Eli wasn't just her son, but her compass. Ben leaned back in his chair and exhaled. He used to think about her a lot back then, when the shop was slow, when life felt too predictable. There was always that what if tucked into the back of his mind. And now, she was back. Just like that. But he also knew better than to believe in fairy tales. Life had taught him that much. He grabbed the photo of him and his father from the corkboard and studied it. His dad had passed 2 years ago, quietly, like he'd lived. He'd taught Ben everything he knew about engines, but not much about people. That part, Ben had to figure out on his own. He wondered what his father would have said about Rachel. He wondered what he would say if she asked about his past, the parts he didn't show anyone. Saturday morning, Rachel sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and a stack of bills. Eli was watching cartoons, his tiny legs bouncing against the couch as he sang off-key to the theme song. She didn't mind the noise. What she minded was the silence that followed when Eli wasn't around. A bill from the electric company caught her eye, then the rent reminder, then the dental payment plan she still hadn't finished. She rubbed her temples and tried to breathe through it. A knock on the door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. She peeked through the blinds and saw a familiar pickup truck. Ben stood on the porch with a cardboard box in his hands and a slightly nervous smile. Rachel opened the door, surprised. "Hi." "Hey," Ben said. "I was heading back from the hardware store and this was in my back seat. Meant to give it to you last night." He handed her the box. Rachel opened it and laughed. Inside was Eli's rocket ship toy. "He's been crying about this all morning. Said the raccoons stole it." Ben grinned. "Figured I'd save the raccoons from another accusation." Rachel stepped aside. "Want to come in for a bit?" Ben hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Sure." Inside, Eli spotted him and jumped up. "That's the car man." Ben crouched down and offered the toy. "You left this in my truck, Space Commander." Eli snatched it with a grin. "I thought the spies got it." Ben widened his eyes. "Well, I fought off 3 of them, but don't worry, I kept it safe." Eli gasped, clearly impressed. Rachel watched the exchange, her heart catching in her throat. It wasn't just that Ben was kind, it was how easy he was around Eli. No hesitation, no forced charm, just presence. She poured a second coffee and handed it to Ben. They sat in the kitchen, Eli now dragging his toy spaceship through a galaxy made of cereal crumbs. Rachel said softly, "He likes you." Ben smiled. "He's got good taste." She looked down at her cup. "I haven't brought anyone around him in a long time." Ben didn't respond right away. "I'm not trying to be anyone, Rach. I just wanted to see you again." She met his eyes. "I wanted that too." The air between them stilled, not awkwardly, but with meaning. Rachel broke it gently. "Do you have family around?" Ben shook his head. "Just me. My dad passed a couple years ago. My mom's in Florida, but we don't talk much. It's quiet most days." Rachel nodded. "I know that feeling." Ben took a sip of his coffee. "I used to think I wanted a big life, books, cities, maybe a teaching job, but I don't know. The shop's been good to me, keeps me grounded, gives me time to think." Rachel smiled. "I used to want to open a gallery, show my art, but now I draw rocket ships and ducks in bow ties, and honestly, I think that's better." Ben looked at her, eyes soft. "You always made people see the world differently, even back then." Rachel looked away, the compliment too direct to hold eye contact. "You did too, just with words." Eli ran up then, interrupting them both. "Can Mr. Ben come to the fair with us today?" Rachel blinked. "Eli, what fair?" Eli pointed at the flyer stuck to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a banana. "This one, the Fall Festival." Ben turned to her, a little amused. "You going?" "I was planning to," Rachel said. "Maybe, if I finish the laundry." Eli beamed. "Come on, please, Mommy." Rachel sighed playfully, then looked at Ben. "What do you say? Want to get dragged to a pumpkin patch and eat overpriced funnel cake? Ben grinned. Sounds like a perfect Saturday. Rachel smiled, feeling something shift inside her, like a window opening after a long season of being shut. That afternoon, the three of them walked the gravel path into the fall festival, Eli racing ahead with a sticky cotton candy hand and Rachel trying to keep pace in boots that weren't built for uneven ground. Ben walked beside her, holding 2 lemonades and casually dodging toddlers with face paint. It wasn't romantic, not exactly, but it was real, and for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. They watched Eli play ring toss, then wandered through the hay maze. Ben won her a tiny stuffed bear at the darts booth. Rachel bought them kettle corn. They sat on a bench watching the sun dip low behind rows of orange tents. Rachel said quietly, "You fit in here." Ben looked at her. "What do you mean?" "You, with Eli, with this day. You're good at showing up." Ben looked away for a second, then said, "I wasn't always." Rachel didn't press him. She just reached out and rested her hand briefly on his. "You are now." And in that touch, small, quiet, completely unassuming, something passed between them that words couldn't hold. It wasn't love yet, but it was beginning. Sunday morning came slower than usual, with the kind of soft, quiet air that felt borrowed from someone else's life. Rachel stirred sugar into her coffee, while Eli constructed an elaborate rocket launch out of couch cushions and laundry baskets. The house smelled like toast and markers, and the kitchen table was a mix of breakfast crumbs and crayon drawings. She checked her phone once, then again. No message, but she hadn't expected one. Last night had been something. Not a date, not exactly, but not just a friendly outing either. There had been laughter and hand-holding, not in the literal sense, but in the way two people carry each other's stories with care. The festival lights had felt warmer with Ben around, and that moment on the bench, when she had rested her hand on his, had lingered long after the drive home. Now her thoughts felt like the end of a book chapter, peaceful but tinged with anticipation. By noon, Eli was down for a nap after an epic tantrum over glue sticks, and Ben still hadn't texted. Rachel wasn't sure why she expected anything. It had only been a day. And still, her mind wandered. Not toward worry, but toward wonder. She busied herself with grading art portfolios, paper after paper of colored chaos, fingerprints, and imaginative storytelling. One kid had drawn a spaceship with a pizza delivery window. Another had recreated his cat's birthday party. She smiled through them all, but her thoughts kept drifting. Around 3, her phone buzzed. "Ben, want some real coffee? I make a mean French press." Rachel grinned, then typed back. "Rachel, you trying to impress me with your brewing skills?" Ben, "Always. 20 minutes?" Rachel, "You're on." She stared at the screen for a beat longer, then stood quickly, pulling on a soft cardigan and brushing her hair back with her fingers. She looked in the mirror by the front door, paused, and then whispered to herself, "It's not a date." But this time, it wasn't convincing. Ben's apartment was exactly what she expected, and nothing like it at all. It was clean but lived in, warm but quiet. The living room held a small, well-worn couch, a sturdy bookshelf filled with car manuals and poetry collections, and a faded rug that looked like it had history. Rachel took it all in as she stepped inside. "Wow," she said, setting down her bag. "I was expecting more grease and tools." Ben laughed as he poured hot water into the French press. "That's the garage. I try to keep the oil from following me home." She looked around again, her eyes landing on a framed quote on the wall. "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart." Rilke Rachel pointed. "You still love that quote." Ben smiled. "Some things stick." She walked over to the bookshelf, scanning the spines. "This is you," she said quietly. "Still the dreamer, just a little dustier." He handed her a cup. "I'll take that as a compliment." They sat across from each other, a low wooden table between them, and for a while they just sipped. The silence wasn't awkward. It felt earned, like they both understood the need for breathing room. Rachel set her cup down. "So, do you still write?" Ben looked at her for a moment, then said, "Not really. I used to journal. Tried a few short stories after my dad died. But life got louder than the words." Rachel nodded slowly. "Yeah, that happens." He leaned back. "What about you? Still painting stars and strange creatures?" She smiled. "Some nights, after Eli's asleep. Most of the time I'm just trying to stay awake long enough to wash the paint off my hands." Ben watched her carefully. "You're tired, Rach. I see it." She let out a soft laugh. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who remembers what you looked like when you weren't carrying the world." Her smile faltered. She didn't mean to, but suddenly her throat tightened. Rachel said quietly, "Sometimes I don't even know who that girl was, the one who dreamed so big, the one who thought life would bend if she just held on hard enough." Ben leaned forward. "She's still there. You just built a world on top of her, and now you're holding that together instead." Rachel blinked back, a sudden sting in her eyes. "You always did say things that cut straight through." He looked away, like he wasn't sure he should have said it. "Sorry." "No," she said quickly. "Don't be." They sat for another minute in the quiet weight of the moment. Then Rachel asked, "Why didn't you ever say anything back then, in college?" Ben gave a small, sheepish smile. "You want the truth?" She nodded. "I was going to," he said. "Once. It was the last week of the semester. I had this whole speech planned. I even practiced it in the mirror." Rachel's eyes widened. "Seriously?" He nodded. "But then I overheard you talking to someone, saying you were moving back home, that your dad was sick." Rachel swallowed hard. "Oh. I figured you didn't need some guy complicating your life," Ben said. "So I kept it to myself. Thought maybe you'd come back. But then time happened." Rachel felt a heaviness in her chest. "I didn't know you heard that." "I was walking past the studio hallway," Ben said. "You were telling a friend. I didn't mean to eavesdrop." She stared down at her hands. "I always wondered why you never said anything. I thought maybe I imagined the whole thing, that you were just nice." Ben shook his head. "You didn't imagine it." Rachel looked up at him. "So what now?" Ben smiled gently. "We finish our coffee, then maybe you let me walk you to your car again." She smiled. "Always with the poetic exits." "It's the grease," Ben said. "It makes me philosophical." They both laughed, and the tension melted like butter on toast, slow and easy. Outside, the sky had turned that soft early evening color, not quite golden, not yet blue. Ben walked beside her, hands in his pockets, the air between them warmer than the breeze. Rachel looked over. "You know, Eli asked about you this morning." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Did he interrogate any raccoons about me?" "Not today," Rachel said. "He asked if the car man was our friend now." Ben smiled at that. "And what did you say?" "I said, I think so." They stopped at her car, the same one he'd helped fix. Ben leaned against the hood, looking at her. Rachel said softly, "I forgot how good it feels to talk to someone who remembers you from before." Ben nodded. "I've been feeling that too." She tilted her head. "What is this, Ben?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out, not to touch her, but just to close the space a little. "It's something," he said. "We don't have to name it yet, but I know it's real." Rachel exhaled slowly. "I'm scared." "I know." She looked down. "I have Eli. I can't afford to get things wrong." "You're not getting it wrong," Ben said gently. "You're just starting again." Rachel looked at him then, really looked, and saw the truth in his eyes, steady, quiet, unshaken. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel like she had to protect herself from hope. Rachel didn't move right away. She stood beside the car, her hand resting on the door handle, as if she needed a few extra seconds to let the weight of Ben's words settle. The wind carried the faint scent of dried leaves and motor oil. It felt like fall, but also like the beginning of something she wasn't sure how to name. Ben was still there, not just physically, but fully present in the way people rarely were. It was unsettling and comforting all at once. Rachel finally said, "You always make it sound simple." Ben shook his head slowly. It's not simple, but it doesn't have to be impossible either. She smiled faintly. You know, when I saw you on that road, I thought it was a weird dream, like one of those universe prank kind of things. I didn't expect it to turn into this. Ben looked at her. Me either. Rachel opened her car door but didn't get in. I'm not saying yes to anything, not yet. I'm not asking you to, Ben replied gently. But, she added, glancing at him, I'm not saying no either. That made Ben laugh, a short, genuine sound that seemed to pull something loose in both of them. You have plans tomorrow? He asked. I have a few classes, but Eli's at my mom's for the night. Why? There's this place, Ben said. Not fancy. A little diner near the lake, great pancakes, terrible wallpaper. I was thinking maybe you'd come with me. Rachel hesitated, then nodded. Okay, pancakes and ugly wallpaper. Sounds like a risk I'm willing to take. Ben took a step back, smiling. Pick you up at 9? Rachel grinned. See you then. She got in and drove away, but she didn't turn on the radio. She didn't need to. The quiet hum of her own thoughts was enough, warm and cautious and hopeful. Monday morning, Ben stood outside Rachel's house in a dark denim jacket and a slightly wrinkled button-down that still smelled faintly of his garage. He held 2 travel mugs in one hand, one for him, one for her, and nervously tapped his foot on the porch step. When Rachel opened the door, she blinked at the coffee first. You remembered how I take it? She asked, surprised. 2 sugars, splash of oat milk, Ben said. I've got a decent memory. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Impressive. I practiced, Ben said with a wink. She took the cup and followed him to the truck, which had been freshly cleaned. The dashboard was dusted, the floors vacuumed, and a single old CD, labeled Road Mix 2008, sat ready in the player. As they pulled out of the driveway, Rachel asked, Is this the same truck from college? Rebuilt twice, Ben said proudly. Runs better now than when I bought it. She sipped her coffee and glanced out the window. The drive was peaceful. The lake wasn't far, and the back roads twisted through trees still clinging to their last golden leaves. At the diner, Ben opened the door for her and gestured dramatically to the interior. Prepare yourself. Rachel burst out laughing. The wallpaper was indeed horrible, pastel strawberries with gold trim. The booths were cracked vinyl, the menus laminated and curled at the corners, and the waitress behind the counter looked like she'd been there since the place opened. Rachel whispered, This is perfect. They sat in the corner booth with a view of the lake through a foggy window. Pancakes came in stacks, dripping with syrup, and the coffee refills were endless. After they'd finished eating, the conversation shifted, slower now, deeper. Ben wiped his mouth and said quietly, There's something I've been meaning to say. Rachel looked up. I used to be afraid of becoming my father, he said. He was a good man, but he kept people at a distance, worked hard, came home tired, never really talked. I think that's why I never said anything to you back then. I didn't know how. Rachel listened closely. But the truth is, Ben went on, I never stopped thinking about you, and when I saw you again, the tire, the road, I thought, maybe this is my second chance to do something differently. Rachel didn't speak right away. She looked out at the lake, then back at him. I'm scared too, she said softly. Not of you, just of wanting something I might not get to keep. My life is full, messy, and Eli, he's my everything. Ben nodded. I know. I don't want him to get attached to someone who's not going to be around, she added, and I don't want to break my own heart trying to make space for something that won't fit. Ben reached across the table, not to hold her hand, but just to rest his fingertips near hers. What if we don't try to fit anything? What if we just share space for a while? No promises, just honesty. Rachel's breath caught. She looked at him. Not just the boy she used to know, but the man in front of her now, patient, real, still kind. Finally she said, Okay, we share space. Ben smiled, and as they sat there in the diner with the ugly wallpaper and the view of the lake, something unspoken passed between them, Not certainty, not even a beginning yet, but trust, a seed planted in the middle of real life, and that was more than enough. The following week moved like wind through cracked windows, quiet but undeniable. Rachel found herself thinking about Ben more often than she wanted to admit, not in the infatuated way she had years ago, but in the real way. The way that made her check her phone before bed, the way that made her wonder if things she'd long written off, like love or romance, or simply not doing life alone, were still possible. She was also careful. Ben had been respectful, steady. They'd seen each other twice since the diner, both times brief, both times casual. Once he stopped by to return Eli's forgotten sweater after a Saturday workshop. The second, they met for lunch near her school. He brought her a sandwich wrapped in parchment and remembered to skip the onions, because she hated how they made her breath smell like a toolbox. He never pushed. But that didn't mean she wasn't scared. Rachel stood in front of her mirror on Friday afternoon, brushing her hair quickly before heading to pick up Eli. Her phone buzzed. Ben. Hey. Could use a break from the smell of brake fluid. Want to meet at the park? She stared at the screen. It was so easy. So simple. But that was what made it hard. Nothing else in her life was that uncomplicated. She typed back, Rachel. Sure. See you at 4? He replied with a thumbs up. Eli was thrilled. The park meant monkey bars and swings and chasing geese, and Rachel was happy to watch him fly in circles while she sipped coffee under the shade. Ben arrived with that same unhurried pace, holding a second coffee and a brown bag filled with something that smelled like chocolate. Peace offering, he said, handing it over. Brownies, the real kind. Rachel took it with a grateful smile. You keep showing up with food. I'm starting to think it's your love language. Ben grinned. That and tire changes. They sat on the bench as Eli launched into orbit, cape trailing behind him. Rachel leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment, soaking in the warmth. The air smelled like wood chips and grass, and laughter drifted across the playground like music. Ben glanced at her and asked, Do you ever think about what your life might have looked like if things had gone differently? Rachel opened one eye. Like if I hadn't left college early. Ben nodded. Yeah. Or if we'd talked. Said something. Rachel was quiet for a moment, then said, I think about it more lately than I used to. Ben's voice was soft. Me too. Rachel turned to face him. What about you? You ever wish you'd done something else? Ben tilted his head, considering. Sometimes, but I think we find the roads we're meant to be on, even if we take a few wrong turns. Rachel smiled. You sound like a bumper sticker. Better than sounding like a tire commercial, Ben said with a smirk. They both laughed and the moment eased, but beneath the lightness something lingered. A question neither had asked yet, a truth Rachel didn't know how to bring up. And then Ben's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, the smile on his face dimming for just a second. He locked the screen quickly and shoved the phone into his jacket pocket. Rachel noticed. You okay? She asked. Yeah, he said quickly. Just a parts supplier being annoying. Sorry. But something about the way he said it didn't sit right. His tone, maybe, or how fast he looked away. Rachel let it go, for now. But later that night, after Eli had gone to sleep and the house was still, she found herself staring at the ceiling, wondering. And that wondering turned into scrolling. She didn't do it with any bad intent. It wasn't about snooping. It was about understanding. She searched his name. Ben Dawson Mechanic, small town. It wasn't much, but a few local articles popped up. One from the year he took over Donnie's auto. A small feature in the paper. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then she found something older. A news snippet, almost nothing really, from about 6 years ago. Local man arrested for DUI, no injuries reported. Her stomach dropped. She clicked it. Read it twice. It was him. No photo, but the name and age matched. The date fit with what he'd once vaguely said about resetting everything. There were no follow-ups, no mugshots, just a brief line that the charge had been dropped after a deferred program. But it was enough to crack the trust she'd been building brick by brick. Rachel sat frozen, heart pounding. She didn't care about perfection. God knew she wasn't perfect. But this? It felt withheld, and that made it feel dishonest. She closed her laptop and tried to sleep, but the ceiling seemed louder than usual, and so did the questions in her chest. Saturday morning she waited. She thought maybe he'd text, maybe she'd get some clarity. Nothing. By noon she made up her mind. She drove to Donnie's auto. The bay door was open. Ben stood under the hood of a sedan, wiping his hands on a rag. When he saw her, his face lit up, until he noticed her expression. "Hey," he said. "Everything okay?" Rachel didn't waste time. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ben froze. "Tell you what?" "I found the article," she said. "About the DUI." His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He set the rag down slowly. "It was a mistake. One night. A stupid, stupid night." "Then why hide it?" she asked. "I wasn't hiding it," Ben said quickly. "I just didn't want that to be the first real thing you knew about me again. It didn't feel fair." Rachel folded her arms. "So you let me believe you were safe, steady, perfect." "I never said I was perfect." "But you let me think it," she said. Ben stepped forward. "Rachel, I didn't want to scare you off. I didn't want you to think that who I was on my worst day is who I still am." She shook her head. "It's not the mistake, Ben. It's that you didn't trust me with it." He was silent for a moment. "You're right, I should have told you." She didn't say anything. Ben looked down. "I was 25. My dad had just gotten diagnosed. I was spiraling. One night, I drank too much after the hospital and made the worst decision of my life. I didn't hit anyone. I didn't hurt anyone, but I could have." Rachel swallowed. "And you've been clean since?" "I haven't touched a drink since that night," Ben said. "I went through the program, paid every fine, went to every class. I rebuilt everything, the shop, my reputation, my life. But yeah, I still carry it." Rachel softened slightly, but the ache remained. "I just wish you'd trusted me enough to tell me first," she whispered. Ben nodded slowly. "I understand." There was a long pause. Then Rachel said, "I need some time." Ben didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just nodded again and stepped back. "Okay." She turned and walked away, her steps steady, but her heart uncertain, because trust was a fragile thing, and now it needed time to be rebuilt. Rachel didn't cry on the way home. She didn't blast music or call anyone to vent. She just drove, street by street, through the quiet hum of her neighborhood, past the same stop signs and cracked sidewalks she passed every day. But today, it all felt different. She pulled into her driveway and sat in the car for a moment, watching the wind stir the branches of the maple tree out front. She thought about how fast things had shifted, from lightness and laughter to a knot in her chest she couldn't untie. She didn't want to be unfair. People made mistakes. God, she'd made plenty, but this one hit differently. She stepped inside the house and found Eli at the dining table, legs swinging from the chair as he carefully cut paper with his plastic scissors. He looked up and grinned. "Hi, Mommy." "Hi, love," she said, ruffling his hair. He held up his creation. "I made a moon man." "That's amazing," she said, and meant it. Rachel sat beside him, her eyes tracing the sharp little corners of the paper suit he'd carefully folded. Kids had this way of seeing the world, whole and possible, long before life started teaching them otherwise. And yet, she couldn't stop the voice in her head that whispered, "Be careful who you bring into his world." That night, after Eli had fallen asleep with his moon man tucked under his pillow, Rachel pulled out her sketchbook. She didn't sketch at first, just held the pencil, let the quiet speak. Eventually her hand began to move. She didn't draw Ben. She didn't draw herself. She drew a bridge, cracked in the middle, barely holding, but still there. And something about that felt honest. 2 days passed. Ben didn't text. Rachel wasn't sure if that hurt more or less than if he had. She kept herself busy, taught classes, graded work, took Eli to the library. She even organized her closet, which she hadn't done in a year, but none of it kept the thoughts from circling. On Wednesday morning there was a knock at the door, not loud, just enough to pull her from the kitchen. She opened it to find a small box sitting on the welcome mat. No one was there. She stepped outside and looked around, but the street was empty. Inside the box was a paperback book, Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke, and a folded note. She recognized the handwriting. Rach, you once told me this book made you feel seen. I read it again this week, for the first time in years. I don't have the right words. I don't even know if I should be saying anything. But I wanted you to know I'm still here. Not perfect. Not pretending to be. Just still here. Rachel sat down on the stairs, the book in her lap. She turned it over in her hands, like it might give her answers. It didn't fix everything, but it said something she needed to hear. He wasn't pushing. He wasn't demanding forgiveness. He was still here. That evening, Rachel walked Eli to the park after dinner. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass. He ran toward the swings, cape flying again, giggling as he shouted something about space aliens needing bedtime stories. Rachel watched him, arms folded loosely, the wind tugging at her cardigan. She let herself breathe just for a minute. No pressure, no decisions. Then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, and there was Ben. He stopped a few feet away, not assuming anything, not stepping closer. I didn't expect to see you, Rachel said. I didn't expect you to be here either, Ben replied softly. But I'm glad I did. They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of children echoing around them. Rachel looked at him. You didn't have to leave the book. Ben gave a half shrug. Didn't know what else to do. She nodded. Thank you. He studied her face. How are you? Rachel sighed. I've been thinking a lot. Ben waited. I don't need perfection, she said quietly, and I don't expect people to come without scars. She paused. I need honesty, especially with Eli in the picture. Ben nodded. I understand. Rachel looked away for a second, then back. I believe you when you say you've changed. I do. And maybe I need to change a little too. Ben tilted his head. How so? I've been so used to protecting everything, guarding every corner of my life, that I forgot how to let anyone in. Ben stepped a little closer, slowly. So what now? Rachel looked at Eli, still spinning in circles, fearless and free, then back at Ben. Now, she said, we take it one step at a time. No rushing, no hiding, no pretending. Ben smiled. That's more than enough. She returned the smile, softer this time. You still owe me pancakes. Only if you bring the syrup, he said. Rachel laughed, and something inside her began to loosen, a knot that had been there for far too long, and as the sun dipped low behind them, she knew it wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about choosing who you trust to walk with you into the future. The following week settled into something resembling rhythm. Not quite routine, not yet, but something with shape. Rachel went about her days with a quiet steadiness. She dropped Eli off at preschool, taught her classes, and kept a part of her heart open in a way she hadn't before. Ben didn't push. He didn't flood her inbox or knock on her door with grand gestures. Instead, he did something harder. He gave her space. But space, it turned out, could sometimes become an invitation. It was Thursday afternoon when Rachel found herself standing in her garage, staring at the old painting she'd never finished. A watercolor of a small boy reaching toward the stars, his feet planted in what looked like a field of chaos. It had always felt incomplete, until now. She grabbed a brush and began again. Later that evening, she sent Ben a text. Rachel, you still owe me pancakes. He responded within minutes. Ben, I never break breakfast promises. Saturday morning, Rachel, bring your appetite. Ben, and syrup. She smiled. Saturday came like a held breath finally released. Rachel wore a soft blue sweater and jeans, comfortable but still put together. She made pancakes with Eli's help, and by help she mostly meant mess. But there was laughter in the kitchen again, and she didn't stop it. When Ben arrived, he brought orange juice, fresh fruit, and a slightly nervous smile. Eli ran to the door like Ben had lived there his whole life. "Mr. Ben, come sit. I made the table." Ben knelt down. "Then it's going to be the best breakfast I've ever had." Rachel watched them together and felt a strange ache in her chest. Not fear. Something closer to gratitude. Because whatever this was, whatever it became, it was grounded in something real. They ate pancakes, sticky and uneven and perfect. They laughed when Eli accidentally dumped syrup on Ben's lap, and Rachel offered him a towel and a grin. After breakfast, Eli retreated to the living room with his moon man, and Rachel poured a second cup of coffee. She and Ben stood by the kitchen window, watching a squirrel try to carry an entire croissant up the fence. "You know," Rachel said, "I thought after everything I'd feel guarded, that it would take longer to let you back in." Ben looked at her, listening. "But instead," she went on, "I feel calm. Like maybe not everything in my life has to be hard to be real." Ben's voice was quiet. "It doesn't." She turned toward him fully. "I want this. I don't know what it looks like yet. I don't have a 5-year plan. But I want to try. If you do." Ben smiled. "I do." Rachel nodded slowly. "And there's one more thing." She disappeared into the other room and returned with something in her hands, a canvas. The old watercolor now finished. The little boy still reaching, but now the stars were clearer, closer, and standing just behind him, her hand on his shoulder, was a figure. A man, steady, quiet, and full of light. Ben stared at it, breath caught. Rachel said softly, "That's you." He didn't speak right away, just stepped forward, touched the edge of the canvas like it might disappear. "I don't know what to say," he finally whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Rachel replied. "Just stay." Ben looked at her, eyes full. "I'm not going anywhere." She smiled, and in that small kitchen, with pancakes still cooling on the stove and a boy humming space songs in the next room, something whole finally settled into place. Not perfect, but true, and that was everything.